Okay, I want to talk to you now about some of the fundamentals of economics, of market economics. You hear a lot of talk about it, but people don't really get into discussing some of the underlying principles. Even in economics classes, they'll give you the supply and demand slope, and a lot of people call it laughs with graphs because that's pretty much all you do. And so I wanted to just discuss some of the fundamentals, and so there's going to be several clips with this, and associated with it is the handout Fundamentals of Economic Theory. This is not comprehensive for everything, but I think I want to highlight some I think really key points about the way that decentralized market economic system works, and in fact some of the philosophy behind it. Now, the core of all Western economics, market economics, is the idea of voluntary exchange. It is assumed in a market that markets only will exist where people have property rights, where they are secure in owning their possessions, and that there's some kind of rule of law that prevents people from coming in and stealing stuff from people, and also prevents people from extorting or bullying, basically being the bandits in the Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai, or even the Three Amigos. So there can be no El Guapos of the world. We have to be in a state where we have some kind of rule of law, and where people are free to choose. And when people are free to choose, there's kind of an assumption that they will not engage in agreements with other people if they aren't mutually beneficial, right? And so there's kind of an assumption in there is an assumption in economic theory that voluntary exchanges between individuals are mutually beneficial. And they actually have a word for it. It's called Pareto efficient. And Pareto's a guy who came up with the concept, or at least got it pinned on him. And a Pareto efficient agreement or exchange is something that makes both parties to the exchange better off. And the assumption is where people are free to choose, they would never engage in an exchange that would make them worse off. So voluntary exchanges are presumed to make both participants better off, as I've said how many times now. But take that point, it's worth repeating. Take that point, hold on to it, okay? Now, there are some conditions that must occur in order for this to actually be the case, that both people will be better off. And so you have on the top of your handout here, you have several conditions that have to be met. Some people call them assumptions of the theory about the way the world works, for us to be confident that voluntary exchanges are mutually beneficial. The first one is rationality. People have to be wealth maximizers. That is to say, they have to be trying to make themselves better off, right? They have to be out to do, to pursue their own self-interest in order for them to, in making this agreement, to say, oh yeah, I'm doing this because it makes me better off. If you are a masochist or if you are an altruist, maybe you would engage in something that wouldn't make you better off. But that is to say, people are self-interested and we assume they're wealth maximizers. And that's a fundamental assumption of economics, and one of the things that makes it unique in that the market system works when people are self-interested. Some people call it greedy. And it doesn't assume that they're going to rise, or, we're not appealing to anyone's better nature here, okay? So rationality, that's the first thing. The second thing is, when making an exchange, there has to be symmetric information. Both parties have to have roughly the same amount of information in order for them to be able to make a deal, that reasonably makes them both better off. This is why insider trading is illegal. Insider trading violates this principle, and that's why the SEC is death on it, because when one party has information where they know something, they know that in the case of insider trading that their stock is maybe going to be worthless, that maybe some bad news is going to be released by the company, so they sell it ahead of time, and the person buying it wouldn't buy it if they knew, right? That's asymmetric information, and it can make one person worse off. So we don't have that perfect information, but we have to have a situation in which there's disclosure and there's kind of a symmetric information in there. The other thing is we have to have costless communication. Exchanges will work when we have communication between all possible participants. And, if I've got something I want to sell, I have to find the buyer. And the more communication, or the cheaper communication is, the easier it will be for me to find somebody who will make things, make that exchange with me. And so we need to have something here where all actors are able, we have to have communication, right? It's necessary to encourage. It's not so much without communication you would have an agreement made that would make one person worse off. It's that without communication, the two people never get together. Now, if you want an example in the real world, well, first of all, markets, the original marketplaces, were places where everyone would come together, and it was easy to communicate. If they all meet at the same time, they're all in the same place. Communication is now costless, basically. eBay is a great example of something that makes communication between potential buyers and sellers very inexpensive. And, there's that commercial on eBay where someone's got a lime green car, and he's, I'm going to sell this. And his wife's like, who wants to buy that? And then you cut to the guy who owns everything he owns is lime green, and he's like, come to mama. That's costless communication. And eBay is very helpful in that it lowers the cost of communication and lets people make more people get together to make deals. Anonymity. This is a huge issue in economics. People have to deal with each other in terms of the price, basically. That's the shorthand for in economics. But basically, when you make a deal to either hire somebody or to sell them something, you have to be making that deal strictly in terms of price and terms of the contract. You can't be dealing with someone based on other aspects. Their family, their religion, their race, right? That's what anonymity means. And markets are more efficient the more anonymity reigns supreme. When you ignore extraneous information, when you don't restrict your business dealings to people who look like you or who pray like you, you actually have a wider range of people to make deals with, and it's more efficient. Markets abhor discrimination. Discrimination is, and we have it around the world. We have it in our history. You have it all around the world. Discrimination is something that really is a collective decision where a group of people say, we want to exclude this other group, and they have to get people to toe the line. It's much more of a political phenomena. In economics, where people are discriminated against, they tend to be the cheap labor. And there's always this huge incentive for producers to say, or employers or whoever, to make that deal with the person being discriminated against. So markets have a kind of built-in mechanism where, there may be things preventing it. There may be social and political attitudes preventing people from doing it, but there's always an economic incentive to ignore extraneous information and just deal with people based on price, their ability, that kind of thing. Property rights. I already mentioned you have to have property rights. This is a fundamental thing. People have to have the right, have to be secure in owning the property. Their property, the way to get property has to be to get someone to give it to you. You can't just go steal it. Right? If you're in a situation where I can just go steal stuff, no one's going to make any deals with each other. They're simply going to take what they want. And you have to have not only the security, you have to have property rights. You have to have laws that say, yes, you can sell things. Property rights come in three flavors. You have use rights, which is your right to use a piece of property or technically to exclude other people from using it. Then you have income rights, which is your right to charge rent on a piece of property. And then you have transfer rights, your right to sell the thing to somebody else, to transfer these rights over. Where you don't have fully defined rights in these things, you have problems. Great example, Ethiopia. The famine they had in Ethiopia largely resulted from the fact that farmland had been apportioned out to the public. It had been taken from the upper classes, the aristocracy, had been by the government redistributed to the public, and in inefficient, into little plots, were essentially inefficient, and as a result, people weren't able really to make money on the farms. And the government, they'd given use rights to people, but being kind of Marxist, they didn't give them income or transfer rights. As a result, you couldn't lease your land to somebody and you couldn't sell it to someone, so you couldn't have a rearranging of the property into a more efficient system. You had a lot of people abandon their land because they weren't making any money on it. They went someplace else and did something. You see, you had a lot of land that was fallow and people weren't able to use. And that led to inefficiencies in the system. Property rights are extremely important. And government is very important in defining them. Property can be anything that's scarce. Anything that's useful that's scarce, it can be defined as property. And there's a lot of things that there are property rights defined in that you might not think of as traditional property. Airport landing slots, the electromagnetic spectrum, internet, web addresses, URLs. All of these things are property that, and 1-800 numbers. All these things are useful things that became scarce, and you had to define property rights in them. You had to come up with a way to say, okay, this is yours. If you had CBS.com and CBS certainly wants that number, you had to have that right to sell it, and that's something the government does and constantly has to reinvent, or not reinvent, but invent new property rights and redefine. The last thing, you have to have known quality. Products, people have to be able to measure the quality of the product. And this goes beyond having asymmetric information. This goes to just, hey, here's this thing. I have to know how good it is. And if you don't know how good it is, then you have a problem. You don't know whether or not you're getting what you're paying for. You don't know what value to place on it. And it becomes very difficult to set prices. It's almost a definition of a commodity, that a commodity has uniform quality, that although there is always variation, there's not much variation in the quality of gasoline, unleaded gasoline, standard gasoline. It's all just about the same. And in fact, it's defined by these particular quantities. Rice, wheat, steel, they're all essentially known entities and established. Those are things that are commodities, can then be widely traded, and it allows you to make good, and people actually can invest in these things and trade them for the sake of trading them. Other things that are of lesser known quality are very difficult. The ultimate example is used cars. When you have a previously owned vehicle, you don't know the quality of it. You look at the thing and you've got no idea what the quality is, how it's been used. And now there are attempts like Carfax and a couple of other companies will try to measure this for you, but a used car as opposed to a new car, where you're pretty confident that you can read consumer reports, which by the way is an interesting example of an entrepreneurial enterprise to measure the quality of a new car and let you know, right? And they kind of fill a gap and help out a lot with trading. But with a used car, you don't know. And as a result, it's very difficult to buy used cars. It's very difficult to sell them. You can do it, but there's a lot more question in the consumer's mind about what he's getting. Therefore, you're not as likely to pay as much. And that's why, a lot of people will buy a new car instead of an old one, even though there are probably plenty of nice used cars out there. And there's actually a economic theory, market for lemons, that says that because of the difficulty in measuring quantity and measuring quality and communicating back and forth from the previous owner to the new owner, that you don't have optimal sales of cars, that you basically, good cars aren't put on the market, and therefore they're lower quality things, because everyone, not knowing where the quality is, everyone assumes it's low, and because consumers assume it's low and they're only willing to pay for a low quality car, only low quality cars are put on the market at that low price. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And that's why you don't get much money for your car if you go to a dealer. So these are the things that need to be, that are good. These are conditions that are good and beneficial for voluntary exchange. And we look, they don't always exist. And when they don't exist, we look for things. We look for the government maybe to define property rights, maybe to put laws in to prevent insider trading. We look for consumer protection. Maybe we look for a trade group to establish the quality of products, and we look for brand names to produce quality, to let us know. I have here a Sam's Club soda. I'm weird. I don't buy Coke, but the Coca-Cola brand, when it's on one of these things, one of these cans, lets you know exactly what the quality is. We also have entrepreneurs like Consumer Reports that will measure quality and sell you it in the form of their magazine. They'll say, here you go, we bought this car, we drove it for 100,000 miles, this is how it did. So there's a whole bunch of ways that you can produce these conditions. And a market, in order for it to work, it needs all of these things. And it needs the government, it needs entrepreneurs, it maybe needs institutions like trade groups or standards boards. There's a lot of things it needs to make it function smoothly. So kind of the idea of the free market as being Dodge City, not governed, not regulated, is a misnomer. There's a lot of things that need to be done to support it. So no market just freely exists and is maximally efficient. However, we want to keep in mind, what are we trying to do? What do we need done? And how do we handle these things? And if you look at it, even our current, even this here we are in 2009, the financial crises we've had, you can look and go through these things and say, where have maybe some of these things been violated? The question you ask about this crisis is, why did smart people do things? Or, why did all these people screw up? Well, you look through and you say, well, there's a couple things here that maybe have been violated. Symmetric information. The key things, I think, are symmetry of communication and the known quality. I think the ability to measure the quality of loans was greatly impaired. Either the underwriter screwed it up or they just don't know. And I think one of your problems with regulation is it's very hard to assess in these exotic financial instruments what's a good one and what isn't one. And so maybe known quality is. But, so to keep these principles in mind, you can put them in play in a lot of interesting ways.